Hey guys, welcome back, it's Ripe again. In today's title story, my neighbor Karen burned down my house after I got her towed for repeatedly parking on my private property. And by the way, if you haven't already, please check out my podcast for exclusive stories that you won't find anywhere else. Just search for Ripe Stories on any of the big podcast platforms such as Google, Apple or Spotify. And the first one starts like this. So I've lived in my neighborhood for just over a year now, and from roughly 1 month into living here, I started having some issues with a lady who lived a few houses down. I first saw her when I was on my way to work. She was doing some gardening out the front of her house, so I decided I would stop and talk to her. Hey, I've just moved in a few houses, I started before she abruptly cut me off. I don't associate with your people, she snarled and then carried on gardening. For context, I'm a first-generation Japanese man, and she appeared to be a Korean person. My people? What does that? I once again started speaking, only to be cut off. Look, are we gonna have a problem? She stared at me with blank eyes. Well, I guess not, unless you carry on acting like this, I muttered. She stood up and stared at me, her face screaming anger. Before I knew what was happening, she had picked up a handful of dirt and thrown it at my face. Hey, what's your problem? I yelled, quickly shutting the windows to my car and carrying on driving. I was so puzzled. From what I knew, I had done nothing which could have offended her. Work that day went slowly. I could not stop thinking about the incident, it just seemed too bizarre. The following day, once I got outside and was about to get into my car, I realized that there was another car parked right in front of mine on my driveway. I did not recognize the car and decided I would just have to get a taxi to work, as I couldn't waste any time figuring out whose car it was right at that moment. The car was gone by the time I got back. However, when I went out to get some groceries, it was right back on my driveway, preventing me from parking my car. I had to park it on the road and quickly got a clamp out of my boot and put it on the front wheel of the car in my drive. Hopefully someone will return for said car and then have to knock on my door to get me to remove it. Surely enough, an hour later I heard very loud knocks on the door and assumed it was the owner of the car. Can I help you? I asked when I opened the door, to unsurprisingly reveal the lady who I had already had a bad encounter with. Unclamp my car, she yelled, shoving my chest. As long as you don't park it there in the future, I replied, stepping back to stop her touching me again. Huh, whatever, she replied and stormed over to her car, waiting for me to come and remove the clamp. I removed it and assumed that would be the end of whatever this drama was, but I was wrong. For the next day, day after day, she would park her car right in front of mine or wait until I leave and block me from putting my car back on later. I wondered if this was all she bothered to do all day. Each time she would park on my driveway, I would clamp her car and wait for her to come around screaming. She never once said sorry or said she wouldn't keep doing it, she just kept getting angry that I was clamping her car as if I was not in my full right. You don't deserve to have all this driveway, she yelled at me one day. I paid for this driveway, of course I do, and why can't you just park your car in your driveway? I asked her, knowing I would not get a reasonable answer. None of your business, I don't have to explain myself to you. I decided to start leaving for work earlier, and one day, just as I was pulling out of my driveway, she started approaching. Instead of letting me out, she quickly swerved onto my driveway and knocked out one of my side mirrors in the process. Watch where you're going, you better pay for that scratch, she yelled as she got out of her car and started walking back towards her house. I was so furious, I decided to call into work and tell them that I was sick instead of bothering with yet another taxi. They were getting very expensive for me. I stormed upstairs and called a local towing company immediately. They arrived and took Karen's car away. I had to pay them $50 for the service, but at that point, I would have given my kidney to stop this nonsense. Of course, the lady came rushing around the moment she saw what had happened. She nearly broke my door down with all the banging. What's up? Come for a little chat? I asked, faking sincerities. How? What? You vile man! Why would you have my car towed? I have rights, you know? She yelled, a vein pulsing on her head. I started laughing, but then I saw a knife in her hand and I quickly shut up, while also slamming the door and calling the police. She was taken away, and from what I'm aware, she managed to sweet-talk her way out of any charges as she was back home the next day. It was a kitchen knife, so I assume she just told them. She did not realize she had carried it out with her. Deciding I needed a break from all of this drama, I decided to take a little trip away at the weekend. I went over to my parents' house and gave them a full rundown of everything that happened, and they were able to put some humor into the situation. As I was driving home on that Sunday, I heard sirens which were getting louder the closer I got to my house. My heart might as well have stopped beating at the sight I saw. My house was in the process of burning down. There was a plethora of firefighters dotted around, spraying water and foam all over my house to put out the flames. I raced over and slammed on the brakes, leaping out of my car as fast as I could. "Sir, is this your house?" one of the firefighters asked when she saw me rushing over. "Yes, what's happening?" I asked, my voice wobbly as I watched my house filled with all my sentimental items burn. "We don't know who, but we can tell you that someone caused this. The fire started from the outside and we have found evidence." The lady continued, placing a hand onto my shoulder. Moments later, someone else came rushing across the road. I've seen them before. They live opposite to me. "Hey, you might want to see this," they said before pressing play on their phone and showing me a video. It was a video of the vile woman from before setting fire to my house. I honestly stood in shock as the firefighters took the phone and showed the police, who were also nearby. I could not believe she had done this. There was really such a thing as going too far. By the time the fire was out, half of my house was gone, and I'm surprised there was no more than that. The next few weeks were a blur. I spent most of my time shut away in my parents' house just trying to think about what had happened. I got time for work, of course. I had to make an appearance in court to iron out the details of what had happened. I won by a long shot, which I knew I would, but it didn't make me feel much better. "You don't understand, he was discriminating me. He was harassing me and he scratched my car," she yelled at the judge, who was clearly very unamused. "We have all the evidence we need, miss. There's no use for your outbursts," the judge replied as calmly as she could. The woman, who was still screaming at the judge, had to be practically dragged out of the building and straight into the cop car, and she then decided to punch one of the cops, which really worked out in her favor. Overall, I got $500,000, which is way more than all the damages, but most of it is for emotional damages. The state paid the fine, and now she will be paying it back to said state for years. She's in prison for 23 years, so her house was sold and the money was used to partially pay back the debt. Part of me still cannot believe that all of this happened. And yeah, Ripe Stars, if you still enjoy these stories about crazy entitled Karens, then please don't forget to like the video, subscribe to my channel, and maybe even leave a comment, because all of that helps me tremendously. Thank you so much. The next one is another revenge story, and it starts like this. I find myself taking this petty revenge quite frequently, and the whole situation could be avoided if the people involved were slightly more courteous or had respect for those around them. For those of you who fly frequently, this may be an all too familiar situation. Now, this usually happens when the person behind you or someone in their row needs to use the bathroom mid-flight. People have started using the back of my seat as a method to pull themselves up out of their chair as opposed to using their own armrest. They usually pull the seat back 3 to 4 inches due to their leverage and let it go once they are standing. If you're the one in the chair in front of them, this provides you with the sudden unpleasant feeling of your chair unexpectedly rocketing back, followed by a quick reversal launching you forward. A real dick move. 95% of the time, the person who does this either doesn't apologize or is oblivious to their actions. So cue my petty revenge. When this happens to me now, I bide my time waiting for the person's return. Upon their return, but before they sit, I make sure the button that reclines the seat is fully pressed in. The person generally expects the seat is gonna provide that same resistance they used to get out of their seat in the first place. Sorry friend, that resistance is gone. Hearing that sweet shocked gasp as they fall hard into their seat has been one of the new pleasures I have found in flying. Edit, I see a few of you talking about how you think a disability and injury entitles you to being rude. Let me assure you, it doesn't. A simple apology for an oversight would be sufficient to make me and most people think nothing of this. If apologizing for hassling someone else is beneath you, then we will no longer care about your circumstances. If this still has not convinced you, let's assume I'm the one with a bad back or a neck injury made worse by your actions of using my seat back. Does your injury make mine irrelevant? And the next one is another revenge story. And by the way, if you ever had any incidents like this in an airplane, please let us know in the comments about your story. The next one starts like this. A few years ago, when my wife and I were still dating, we went to one of my son's Little League baseball games. We knew in advance which baseball field it would be played in, so we already knew they had no seating for spectators and no shade either. I brought lawn chairs and an ease-up, a canvas canopy with 4 legs. When the game was about to start, we picked out a spot down the first baseline where we could set up our chairs and the ease-up. Several parents were already there to watch their own kids play. Like us, most of them brought their own chairs. I figured I would start with the ease-up, then I would go back to the car to get the chairs. Among the parents who were watching the game, there were two ladies who I assume were Vietnamese that were paying particular attention to me as I put the ease up. They were about 20 feet away from where I was putting the canopy up, but they kept turning around and looking at me, talking about what I was doing and pointing at me. I got the impression that they had a problem with what I was doing, but I had seen people with canopies at the games before, and I had set up behind everyone, so I did not see what the problem was. When I had finished putting up the canopy, I asked my wife, girlfriend at the time, to stay with the canopy while I went back to the car to get the chairs. When I had finished putting up the canopy, I asked my wife, girlfriend at the time, to stay with the canopy while I went back to the car to get the chairs. The car was not parked very far away. When I got the chairs from the car and headed back to the canopy, the two ladies had gotten up and were moving their chairs to be under the shade of my canopy. This was in the afternoon, so the shade provided by the canopy was already several feet away from being directly under the canopy. Instead of being under the canopy, the shade was a few feet to the right of the canopy, leaving the underneath side of the canopy directly in the sun. These ladies set their chairs down right in the middle of the shade of my canopy and were sitting there talking to each other in what I could only guess was Vietnamese. It might have been Thai or Laotian or something, but whatever it was, they were talking to one another and seemed to be very happy with themselves for beating me to the shade provided by my own canopy. I unfolded the chairs beneath the canopy and asked my wife, "How's that?" My wife sat down in the chair and said, "Good, but we are still in the sun." "No problem," I said. There was no one to the left of us, so I picked up the canopy by one of the legs and dragged it across the ground to the left until the shade was covering our chairs. As I did this, the two Asian ladies looked up and around like they are trying to figure out why their shade was disappearing. As if it wasn't completely obvious that I was moving my own canopy so I could sit under the shade I had intended to provide for myself and my wife. I had already been married for 9 years to a really crappy person, so I had a lot of practice in dealing with selfish people who thought of only themselves. I was not about to sit there and just suffer in the sun when I'd been the one to bring the canopy for myself and for my wife. These ladies were mad though. I don't know what they were thinking, but they had the impression that they were entitled to the shade from my canopy because they had sat down there first. "You put that back," one of them said. She had a really thick accent. "You cannot move that." What now?" I asked. I couldn't believe it. "You took the shade. We were sitting here and you took it." The other one said. I was in disbelief that the two women would both come to the same conclusion. I wondered if it was some kind of cultural thing, like maybe where they were from it was bad manners to provide something and then take it away, or maybe if they had gotten there first they thought they were entitled to it. I did not know and I did not care. Those two then turned to each other and were squawking back and forth in whatever language they both spoke. Then they turned back to me. "You put it back," one of them said again. What?" I asked. "This is mine. I brought it here." No, the other one said, and then said something I didn't understand. "You put it back," the first one said again. The second one said something else I couldn't understand. "Yeah," I said, "I'm here to watch the game in the shade. I don't know what you are saying." The first one said something else again in English. Rather than argue, I just pretended I couldn't understand either of them, no matter what they said. Every time they said something, I just answered with, "Okay, thank you." This just made them even more mad. I got them to speak louder and slower and to use different words, but I would keep answering like I had no idea what they were saying. At one point, one of them was saying, "We sit here, you move shade, you sit there, you move back." I shrugged my shoulders and said, "I don't know what you mean. I'm sitting here, this is my chair. I brought it here." Those two ladies sat there and squawked back and forth, kept pointing at me, pointing at the canopy, and pointing at the shade the whole game. As the game wore on, the shade kept moving away from my wife and me due to the angle of the sun and kept moving towards these two ladies. I'd wait until the shade was about to just touch them before I would get up and move the canopy again. And yeah guys, I gotta say, that was absolutely beautiful petty revenge. Then again, I would be surprised if these were Thai people because I've never seen this kind of behavior in Thailand before. But who knows, Karens exist in every single culture, not only in the West. Anyway, the next one is a story from r/am_I_the_a_hole, and it is about a fencing issue. So I live on the outskirts of a big town/small city, making me one of the few people with a big yard. I live on top of a little hill and my yard is really big and runs all the way to a small wooded area, and then the field next to it is also mine. It pretty much cuts my neighbor's yard off. Think like an upside down L-shaped yard. One of the major draws of the area I live in is its lovely view. It was also a big part of why I chose to live here. Most of my neighbors have no fences. Before Corona, I was only really home in the evening and weekends, and the pandemic has forced me to work at home pretty much all the time. I only have to come to the office once a week at most, and as a result, I've started making a lot more use of, well, my house. This includes the yard. I got a back porch and I've noticed that I love sitting outside with my work laptop and a cup of coffee, so that's what I've been doing. The problem is, because I was not home much, I barely do any gardening aside from cutting the grass, which means my yard, especially the portion at the back with the turn, is a perfect soccer field for the neighborhood kids. Especially my neighbors' kids are using it pretty much all the time. I even caught them dragging a goalpost into it. I went to talk to the neighbors as I'm not happy with random people using my yard, and even less happy about not being able to work because of a horde of screaming kids in my yard, even if it is not fenced. But I was met with the whole, kids will be kids, they don't have anything else to do for fun right now, don't worry, you're not using it anyway. I told them I didn't want them using it regardless, but as you can guess by me writing this post, the kids kept using it. So I put up a big wooden fence, the pre-assembled ones where you just gotta put in the posts and drill in the big wooden panels. Honestly, it was quite a lot of work while only being able to ask 2 friends for help, but after a few days I was done. My neighbors kept coming out to complain, begging me to remove it, etc., claiming they now did not even have a view. I figured they were overreacting, but now that I am done, their yard is literally tiny and their view went from a beautiful hilly landscape with woods to the top of a wooden screen. Meanwhile, my view is still the same. Their kids have since come over to ask to play in my yard, as have a ton of other neighborhood kids, as have their parents who were angry. Their kids now have nowhere safe to play, and I'm starting to feel bad. So yeah, ripe stars, let me know in the comments whether you think OP is the a-hole here or not. In my opinion, he's clearly not the a-hole, because let's face it, it's his property, he can pretty much do whatever he wants. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. So a person on Reddit said, not the a-hole, and depending on where you live, you might be liable if someone gets hurt on your property. And yeah, I feel that's a very viable point. Maybe sometimes neighbors are pissed off if you build a big fence or something and their view gets disturbed, but in the end, if someone gets hurt on your property, you might be liable and you definitely don't want that. However, sometimes I am curious about this law, especially in the United States. What if someone trespasses on your property and you clearly have signs everywhere that you shouldn't trespass and they get hurt? Do you really still have to pay the medical costs and everything if something happens? If you know more about this, please let me know in the comments. Anyway, comment number 2, not the a-hole, your neighbors are acting like you're obligated for your yard to be a public park. Plus, they were obnoxious about it, put up whatever kind of fence is allowed by county code. Comment number 3, not the a-hole, it's your property, the parents have no say. I bet most just don't want the kids being inside bugging them. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. My creeping neighbor killed someone. This is an incident that happened a few years ago, but a recent local news story reminded me of it. I live in a really quiet suburban neighborhood, and I have lived there for over 10 years with my wife without any issues. The house right next to me is rental property. I know the owner and that he is very particular about who he rents to, and I've never had problems. However, one neighbor always gave me a weird vibe. He has never did anything to warrant it, and I figured we were just being paranoid. He would even come over and clean up the leaves that came from his tree. One day we get him frantically knocking on our front door around 8 p.m. My wife was nervous about what could be happening, so I answered the door while she was ready with 911. I unlocked my wood door but kept the glass door locked between me and the neighbor. I asked what he wanted. He said that he needed to come inside because he was being chased by a crazy driver and he needed a place to hide. I asked why he couldn't go home and he said because they know where he lives. Something about this seemed really off and I didn't trust him. I told him to go home and lock his doors and call the police. I then shut the door and locked it. I watched the front door from the upstairs window. The guy was just standing there staring at my closed door. Every once in a while he would try opening it and ringing the doorbell before saluting the bird and eventually leaving. It was like something from a horror movie. The next day I went out for some errands. When I got back, my wife told me what I had missed. Apparently the cops came and took our neighbor away, and some reporters came around asking her about an incident he was involved in. According to the reporter, he got into a fight with a delivery driver that ended with neighbor pulling a gun and shooting the guy. Neighbor fled the scene, but security cameras caught the whole thing. Wife told the reporter she didn't know anything about it, and after a few questions they left. Later the whole thing was on the news, including my wife's interview. Apparently the delivery guy was in critical condition and later he died from complications. But wait, it is not over yet. A week later the neighbor shows up again at my house. I was surprised to see him and only talked through the locked doors. I asked him what he wanted, and this time he holds up a laptop and says, "Oh, I just need to come in and charge my laptop." I said no. He looked disappointed and kept pushing the issue, claiming it wouldn't take long and that way we can sit and catch up on things. I lied and told him I didn't have the time or a charger for his laptop and that since he was close by, he should just go home. I left and watched him from the upstairs window. He just stood there saying hello over and over. He keeps trying pulling on my locked door and banging on it. The thick storm glass actually cracks a little as he yells profanity. I yell that I'm calling the cops if he doesn't leave. That is when he stops, throws the laptop and storms off. We haven't seen him since. Next day, the neighbor's house has a for rent sign in the yard and the owner is getting the furniture moved out. He would only tell me that he had to let this tenant go because he was arrested. When sorting through the stuff left behind, he found several pictures of the various neighbors through their windows. He showed me some and they were majorly creepy. But it's been years and I haven't had any trouble from the new tenant since. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.